Hello everyone and welcome to our virtual event today. Now, very excitingly, everyone here on this call is going to be joining us this upcoming season in Svalbard, whether that be on the Viking Fjord or whether that be on board the MV Freya. Now, excitingly, both ships are, the Freya is already up in Svalbard and she's actually out on a very early expedition, so she's up there, and then Viking Fjord is on the way up as well. So both ships are ready to go for the season. In today's virtual event, I'm going to be covering what to expect on your Svalbard expedition. So I'm going to be talking for a little bit, and then we will be doing some questions and answers at the end as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lewis Morecambe. I'm one of the expedition specialists here at Secret Atlas, and I can see a lot of familiar names in attendance today, so a very warm welcome to everyone. And we also have Cindy from our customer service team. So Cindy, a lot of you have probably exchanged emails with Cindy. She's managing our Let's Go at Secret Atlas inbox. Yes, so a bit of housekeeping. So everyone who has joined today, don't worry, we cannot hear you, we cannot see you, but hopefully you can all hear and see myself. There is a little Q&A, a little chat box on your screen. So as we go, do pop in any questions you have, whether that be about your trip, anything about your upcoming trip. Do please post them in the Q&A and we'll try and answer all of them today. And if we can't get around to all of them, we will follow up with an email. Firstly, understanding Svalbard. So where is Svalbard? Hopefully you'll have a rough sense, but Svalbard is this archipelago up off the Norwegian coast. So most of you will be flying into Oslo and connecting up to Longyearbyen, which is the main town located in Svalbard. So it is about a 3.5 hour flight from Oslo into Longyearbyen, and here we are deep in the Arctic Circle. So the Arctic Circle starts around here, so we are very deep into the Arctic Circle. The archipelago, it's about 1,000 kilometers from the geographical North Pole. So for a lot of you on your trips, we'll be coming out of Isfjord in Longyearbyen here, and we'll be heading north. Some of you may experience getting up to the ice edge of pack ice. And if we reach a pack ice and you keep walking, that's when you will get to the North Pole. And at Svalbard, it does fall under the category of Norway. It is a well, especially in the current climate, it is a bit of a, we won't go into politics today, but you can see it is located sort of between Greenland and Russia, but it does come under the Norwegian treaty. So as I mentioned, so flights to and from Svalbard, hopefully most of you have already secured your flights. If you haven't, do reach out to us and we can certainly advise you on what to book. But there's two main airlines that service Longyearbyen, that is Norwegian Air and Scandinavian Airways. Oslo, as I said, is going to be the most common route that most of you will be taking. But in the summer months, there are a few flights each week from Tromsø as well. So if any of you are going via Tromsø, or Tromsø is a great destination to do a sort of a pre or a post Svalbard tour. What to consider when booking your flights. So we do really recommend that you arrive into Longyearbyen at least one day before. As I say, Longyearbyen's a fantastic destination. I'll touch on that in a little bit. So there's plenty to do if you do arrive early, but arriving early just means you avoid, if there are any flight delays, we'd hate for the ship to be delayed or for you, even worse, to miss the ship. And then on the day of disembarkation, so typically on the last day, we disembark around 9 AM. So most guests do fly out the same day. There are a couple of options. So even if you have a flight earlier than 9 AM, sometimes we can accommodate it. So the ship will be docking the night before, so we can accommodate an earlier departure if needed. Or if you've got a flight later in the afternoon or in the evening, what we do, our operations, our ground staff, they can pick you up from the ship. we have an office located in Svalbard, and they can take you to the office. You can store your luggage for the day, and you can go around the shops, have a bit of lunch before we transfer you to the to the airport later in the day. Now, a common question we always get is do I need a visa to enter Svalbard? You do not need a visa for Svalbard. It is a visa-free zone. However, you do need to transit through Norway. So potentially some of you might need a visa. Norway is part of the Schengen zone. So as long as you're allowed or you have a visa to travel within the Schengen zone, if you're coming from the UK, it's not a problem. But yeah, any questions on visas, do reach out and let us know. And before I go on to Longyearbyen, I did want to just touch on that when you arrive into Longyearbyen, all of your transfers are included. So we will be picking you up from the airport. So we have our 2 operations staff, Yaroslava and Sigma Maria. They're based full-time in Longyearbyen. They live there year-round. But they look after all of our Arctic operations, but they're also the ones to greet you at the airport. So look out for the secret at the sign. But yeah, they will be looking out for you. They will transfer you to your hotel the day before. So Longyearbyen, what to see, what to do. As I say, it's a really interesting town. I really love the town. Everything in Longyearbyen is the world's most northern. Geographically speaking, it is the world's most northern town, but I think it's a fantastic town. It has got a really good museums. So for any of you who want to sort of help build excitement for the trip, the Svalbard Museum is a personal favorite of mine. It is a almost like a chronological history of Svalbard. So as you walk through your museum, it starts with sort of some of those early explorers who are trying to reach the North Pole and use Svalbard as a stopping off point. But it also looks into some of the trappers, and it goes into much more modern history about sort of some of the mining that has been happening, and a bit about the sort of geopolitical situation in Svalbard. So that is a really good recommendation. For those of you who are into history as well, the Svalbard, well, the North Pole Explorers Museum is a really, really good oversight into a lot of those early explorers. But when you're on your trip, we do often stop at some of those historic sites where some of these early expeditions would have departed from, or maybe they stopped at Svalbard on their way. In terms of other activities, there are day trips that you can do. So dependent again on the season that you go, you might be able to go out on a snowmobiling day trip. There's a lot of hiking day trips as well. So again, if you want any more specific recommendations, do let us know. And we can put you in touch with companies which you can book onto those activities with. And then lastly, the food and drink in Longyearbyen. So Longyearbyen is home to some fantastic restaurants, some fantastic bars as well. You've got the world's most northern pub, you've got the world's most northern whiskey bar as well. So yeah, there's some really good recommendations, and we will share this presentation with you afterwards. And there are links on here which you can click through and you can see some of our personal recommendations. But the food in Svalbard, it is very sort of like Scandinavian affair. There's a lot of local specialities. Reindeer is often on the menu. It's not uncommon either to see seal on the menu as well. So yeah, have a look at our Longyearbyen guide and we can share more. You can find more information there. Now, most excitingly, what can you expect to see on your trip? So, of course, wildlife is a huge part of any Svalbard expedition. So we are always on the lookout for wildlife. On all of your voyages, you'll have at least 2 expedition guides. So they're the ones who plan the route, but they're the ones who are always scouting for the wildlife. as well. And I'll come on to scouting for wildlife in a bit more detail later on. But essentially, of course, polar bear is one of the big ticket items. It's what everyone wants to see. Now, we do have a good chance of spotting polar bears. We have a very strong success rate of seeing polar bears in Svalbard. Now, I do want to touch on polar bears because there are certain legislations. So when we are on the main coast, on the mainland of Svalbard, we do need to keep to minimum distances. So it might be 300, it might be 500 meters. It depends on what season you are visiting. But on some of our expeditions, if the conditions are right and the opportunity presents itself, we can venture up into the pack ice, up into the ice edge, where if we do spot a polar bear up in the pack ice, we may be able to get a little bit closer, and we will try to get a little bit closer. Of course, we want to respect the polar bear. We don't want to encroach on the polar bear. But hopefully, if we see polar bears up in the pack ice, we may get some sort of closer up images. But it's not all about the polar bear. There's some other incredible wildlife, walruses. We'll see a lot of walruses on our trips. So especially in the summer months, once we head into sort of May, June, July, August, the male walruses, they gather in numbers. So there's certain walrus haul-out colonies that we know, so we can go and visit the walruses. So that's a real spectacle. But not only walruses, we have seals, we have Arctic fox, we have reindeer. And again, in sort of those summer months, especially if we're looking at June, July, August, a lot of those migratory seabirds, such as the puffins, will be there, and some of the migratory whale species will be stopping at Svalbard. But then, talking of whale species, beluga whales, it's not uncommon. We've even spotted them in April before, so we're always on the lookout. But in the summer months, we have our highest chance of spotting whales. And it's not all about the wildlife. As I say, it's an incredible landscapes as well. So we are in Arctic territory. So again, dependent on each season, we're likely to see slightly different landscapes. So in the winter, well, in the early season, so sort of those April, May departures, we're going to see a lot of ice. We're going to see a lot of snow. It's really beautiful. We can be cruising, and we can be cruising through pack ice, and then as we head into the summer months, a lot of that snow melts, but with the snow melted, it does open up access to previously frozen fjords. So in the summer months, we can sometimes do a full circumnavigation of Svalbard as well. And then in the images here, you have the waterfalls coming off of the ice caps, and they are present in sort of the later summer seasons. And before I move on to preparing for your trip as well, I did want to just mention a little bit about some of the historical sites that we might visit. So there's trappers' huts that we can potentially visit, and there are sort of those early exploratory sites as well. And there's also another town called New Åsund, which is a scientific research station. And that is a really interesting town. It is north of Longyearbyen. It's you can only live there if you're doing a scientific research program. But there is a small shop, there's a small museum, and that can be a really, really interesting visit. So we don't do it on every trip, but if conditions allow, we will try and stop there. And then preparing for your trip. So there's this saying we always have here in the office: there's no such thing as bad weather, only unsuitable clothing. So for some of you, you might have been to the Arctic before and you might be very well prepared. But for others, this is a new destination. So again, we have got a packing list. So what to pack for your expedition. Again, this presentation will be shared with you so you can have a look at these links. But essentially, so dependent again on the season which you're visiting. So April, May is classed as springtime in Svalbard. So we can see temperatures of sort of -14 to plus, I would say, especially as we move into May, sort of maybe +5. And then in the summer months, we're talking June, July, and early August, we're sort of hovering above 0. So it can get up to, we have known it to get up to 10. Even one day last year, it did get up to 15 degrees, which was pretty worrying for Svalbard. But a lot of it can certainly be warmer than a lot of people are expecting. And then as we head into sort of those late summer, late August trips, the temperatures do sort of drop below 0 again. But the one thing I would say, Svalbard, it's a very dry destination, so there's not much humidity at all. So I always say, I'm based in the UK, a cold day in the UK can often be a lot colder than, can feel a lot colder than Svalbard anyway. But one important thing on most of our trips, we do try and head further north. So the further north we get, the colder the temperatures can be. And especially out, you saw in the previous slide here, the guests out on the Zodiacs. So hopefully you'll be out on the Zodiacs quite a lot on your trips. But when we're out on the Zodiacs, obviously there can be a bit of wind chill as well. And you can see all of these guests are in the same suit. So that leads me nicely on to the next slide. So included in all of the trips, so we do provide those all-in-one suits. So if any of you have been snowmobiling before, these are sort of a similar suits what you would wear if you were to go snowmobiling. So they keep you warm, they're insulated, and they keep you dry as well. They're also known as sort of survival flotation suits. And we also provide the rubber muck boots. So the rubber muck boots, they're thermal, they keep you warm, and more importantly, they keep you dry. And they're very comfortable. So we will be providing them for you, and I would recommend you wear them whenever we get off the main ship. So when we're getting off the main ship, we're getting into the Zodiacs, and then when we're doing some landings, we're stepping out of the Zodiacs. Often we're stepping onto ice, we're stepping into shallow waters. So wearing these, it's going to keep your feet warm and dry. Of course, if you're doing some slightly longer hikes and you prefer to bring your own hiking boots, that's not a problem. I would just suggest that you change into your own hiking boots once we are ashore. So some top tips of what to wear. So the key is really good base layers. So base layers, I'm talking about some good merino wools. What we want to avoid is any sort of synthetic materials. So when we're going out on excursions, we ideally don't want you in cotton or any sort of non-synthetic materials. So we don't want you in jeans, especially. When we're on the ship, of course, you can wear whatever you like. We are very informal when we're on board a ship. There's no dress policy for dinners. It's just when we're going out on excursions, you need to wear right layers underneath. So as I say, merino wools are a great base layer, but also some, if you've got any sort of lightweight down jackets, they're really good, especially on those early season trips where you can wear the all-in-one suit over it. And then also outer layers. So when we're on the ships, when we're on the excursions, we do recommend that you wear the big overalls. But again, sometimes in the summer months, so June, July, and August, these overalls, they might actually be too much. They might actually be too hot. So you might just be more comfortable in your own jackets and in your own waterproofs. And also when we're on the ship, so sometimes we have some really good views. We have, especially if we're cruising through some ice or if we have a wildlife encounter and we're on the big ship. So more than often, like especially if we see a polar bear, we're definitely not going to land you. So we're often viewing some of the wildlife from the bigger ship. And it might be a bit of hard work to put the big overalls on, and you might just want to put your own jacket on, and you can get out quicker and get the pictures or get the sightings that you want. So I do recommend taking sort of like your own jackets as well, and especially you're going to be spending some time in Longyearbyen and in the town, so it's also good for that reason as well. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, so how we'll stay in touch. So about a week before your expedition, so you will get a final email, and you'll get the contact number, the WhatsApp number of our local team in Svalbard. So as I say, it's Larislava and Sigma Maria. They are our office and our operations staff, and they're based in Longyearbyen. So they'll be the ones to meet you at the airport, take you to your hotel. And then on the day of embarkation, day of joining the ship, they will meet you at your hotel. So we pick you up at 4 p.m. on the day of embarkation. And we are picking up 12 guests, and they might be from different hotels. So if we're not with you at 4 p.m., don't worry, but we will be with you shortly after. And then we take you to the ship. It's about not even a 5-minute drive really, from all of the hotels in town to the dock where you'll board your ship. And then on that first day, we want to disembark as quickly as possible. But before we disembark, we do need to go over some safety briefings. So we'll show you to your cabin, we'll transfer your luggage to your cabin, but we do ask all of our guests to congregate in the lounges of the ship, where you'll meet your expedition team. So on board, you're going to have your expedition leader and you're going to have your expedition guide. So you'll meet both of them, and they'll go over the safety protocols. And more excitingly, they'll go over the plan for the week. Now, with that plan for the week, they will present you with a plan A, but with expedition travel, with small group travel, we often resort to plan B, we often resort to plan C, and by the end of the trip, you could even be on sort of a plan Z. So we're very flexible on board. The guides are always very open with their briefings. You are part of all of the briefings. We'll do 2 briefings a day, one in the morning and one in the evening, to keep you aware of the plans. But the reason why I say it might change is because there's a few factors. There's the weather, there's the ice conditions, both of which might force us to change, but also the wildlife. So if we have a really good wildlife sighting, we're going to stop the ship. So that's why the route might change. If we have a really good sighting, it's not been uncommon. We've spent sort of hours with one subject, with one bear or a walrus colony. So it's very flexible, it can change, but that initial briefing is very important. It gives you a good idea for the ship. And now travel insurance. So everyone has to have travel insurance to come on board our trips. Most importantly for us is sort of that you have a medical evacuation insurance included in your policies. And if you haven't got your travel insurance just yet, again, we have the travel insurance checklist just to make sure your policy is okay. So any questions, do reach out to us, but we will be collecting your personal information as we get closer to your voyage. And again, my colleague, Cindy, she will be in touch with you if there are any queries. Now, again, so some of you should have started to receive these emails. So we have emails and we have an expedition portal. So you'll have essentially a PNR. So you'll have a 6-digit code, which is your booking reference. And then you'll have your surname, which you need to log in to your portals. So when you log into your portals, there is a couple of information. So there's a packing list, there's a joining instructions in there, but also this is where you complete your guest information form. So in this form, you'll need to put in your flight details so we can arrange your transfers. You'll need to put in your passport details. That's very important that the ship has all of your passport details because we will be at times cruising in international waters. And then this is where you put your boot sizes or your shoe size, so we can provide you with the right size boots. And this is where you'll put any dietary requirements or any requests that you have. Once that form is filled in, essentially you're ready to go. But as I say, do keep an eye out on your emails. These will be coming from letsgo@secretatlas.com. And if you do have any questions, just pop an email to either who you booked your trip with, and they can put you in touch with our customer service team, or you can reach out to them directly on letsgo@secretatlas.com. Now, life on board. This picture, this is actually one of my favorite pictures, because whenever I'm on board, being out on the bow is my favorite experience. Especially this picture probably was taken in May, in sort of early season. This is one of the fjords in Svalbard, but it's still full of ice, so that dictates it's probably in the early season. But even in those summer seasons, the further north we head, this is some of the landscapes you're likely to see, especially sort of that sea ice as we head up into the pack ice or up into the ice edge. This is what we'll be cruising from, and getting out on the ship. It is an open ship, so you're more than welcome to be out on the bow as long as the conditions are right. And it's a really beautiful place to take in those Arctic landscapes. So what a typical day on board looks like. So typically we'll be doing sort of a buffet breakfast. So somewhere between 7:30 and 8 is typically when we start the breakfast, and then we want to get you off the ship. So again, if the conditions are right, there's a couple of excursion types that we can do. So we do one excursion called Zodiac cruising. So on both of our ships, we have the two smaller Zodiacs rubber boats. So typically it'll be 6 guests and 1 expedition guide in each boat, and we'll get you off. And the Zodiac cruises, we are cruising closer to the glaciers, we're cruising closer to the icebergs, and sometimes we're cruising closer to get a better viewpoint of some of the wildlife. So that's Zodiac cruising. And then we also do landings. So the landings, typically they can be hiking. For some of our photography departures, it can sort of be setting up sort of a good position for photography. But typically it's short hiking. So hikes, it can be anywhere between sort of, well, it can be 1 to sort of probably a maximum of sort of say 10 kilometers. But being such a small group, we've got the flexibility. So if we have some guests who want to be a little bit more active and go on a slightly longer hike, that's great. And if we've got some guests who want a more of a gentle excursion, we can accommodate both options. So very flexible on board. And so not only is it the activities, so typically on an ideal day, it will be sort of have breakfast, out for an activity, back on the ship for lunch, and then potentially another excursion in the afternoon. Now, that's not to say sometimes the schedule is flipped. So when you board the ship, one of the things the expedition team will ask you is, say, if there is a polar bear sighting at 3 a.m., are you happy to be woken up? And now if all the guests are up at 3 a.m., we've got the flexibility of maybe doing a later breakfast, changing the schedule a little bit. And as well, if you're on some of our photography departures, some of those photography departures, we will do excursions at slightly different times to make the most of the best light conditions. So there's a lot of flexibility involved, but on an ideal day, you'll be off the ship for 2 excursions. But there's been times where we've been on board and we've had great sightings later in the evening, and by no means we are not fixed to that. But also other activities on board. So there are lecture sessions. So your expedition team will be leading lectures on the wildlife, the history of Svalbard, glaciology, marine biology. If you're on a photography trip, the photography leaders, they'll be doing lectures on photography, and they might even be doing some one-to-one sort of photography sessions or photo reviews, shall we say. And then there's a bridge lounge. So the bridge lounge, that is my favorite place to be on the ship. So my big recommendation is when you get up, grab a coffee, tea, and head up to the bridge. Up on the bridge, there'll either be the captain or the first officer there at all times, but this is often where the expedition team is as well. So you're more than welcome to interact with the captain, the first officer. They're very engaging, friendly people up on the bridge. They're happy to share with you sort of some about details about the navigational equipment, all of the charts, the sea ice charts, the depth charts. They're all up on the bridge, and all of that equipment they're happy to share and walk you through it. And they're great. Just they've been captains, first officers up in the Arctic for years. They're full of great stories, so it's well worth spending time up there. But most importantly, this is where the guides are scouting. So we've got binoculars on the ships, so you're more than welcome to use our binoculars. There is enough for everyone, or you can, if you have your own binoculars that you like, I recommend you bring a set that you're probably used to. And this is where they'll be scouting. So if we do spot good wildlife, this is most likely where we will spot it from. So if you're up in the bridge, you're going to be the first to know about the wildlife sighting. Of course, if you're somewhere else on the ship, they will come and find you to let you know. But here is where you'll get the best, well, you get the first knowledge of any sightings. But importantly as well, the more eyes that we have scouting, the better. So I recommend everyone being up on the bridge scouting, and we've got more chance of seeing something. You know, we're looking for very, I say, small animals, but in the big landscape, if we're sort of 500 meters from the coast, like the animals can appear quite small. So the more eyes, the better. So we can point out, and don't worry about being wrong. There's plenty of times I've been on board and I've turned to the expedition team. I said, "Oh, I think I've seen a bear." And they say, "No, Lewis, that's enough a rock." But the more eyes, the better. And one day a rock will turn into a polar bear. So don't worry about being wrong. And then usually once, sometimes more if your guests are into sort of cold water swimming, is we do the polar plunge. So typically we'll do this one evening, and we'll do this from the ship. So this is where you have the opportunity to jump in. It's not for everyone, it's not compulsory, but it is a thrilling experience. For some people, they want to do it once, and it's a great tick. For some people, they want to do it more. So yeah, this is an option as well. But don't worry, we've got a sauna, we've got a hot tub on board, and usually if you do it, there's usually some form of whiskey to warm you up as well. And then dining on board. So as I mentioned, so breakfast and lunch, they tend to be more buffet style, because we sort of want you sort of out off the ships. And then dinner is a more formal, it's not formal because we're not a formal ship, but it's a sit down plated meal service. Now the cuisine on board is really, really good. Again, it's typically Scandinavian cuisine, but often sort of, especially for the evenings, like the chef, like we cater for any dietary requirement firstly, but it's where we want to use local produce where possible. So often you'll find the chef fishing in the day, and often we'll be having fresh fish from dinner, and it's some of the best fish you can ever have up in the Arctic. And if you are into fishing, the chefs are always happy for you to join them on sort of an afternoon or a morning of fishing as well. But throughout the day, there's teas, coffees, sodas, soft drinks provided. There's also snacks as well. So when you've been out on an excursion, you come back on, there's a hot drink and some freshly made snacks waiting for you as well. And then with dinner, we will include sort of your drinks with your dinner, so your beers, your wines, and we try, if the conditions allow, we'll try and do a barbecue out on deck, which is a lot of fun. So the chef and the steward, they'll be out on the deck, they'll prepare a fantastic barbecue. And yeah, it's a really, if you've got a nice clear evening, it's a beautiful experience to be having dinner out on deck. And of course, we do recommend wrapping up for that dinner, but it is a real fun experience on board. So yeah, I've mentioned the bridge lounge. So the bridge lounge is open, as is the rest of the ship. And then we have the lounges as well. So this is a lounge on the Viking Fjord where you've got really good panoramic views. But also on our ship, the Freya, there is a lounge as well. And the lounges are a great place for people to congregate sort of later in the evenings, especially on sort of the photographic tours. They are sort of gathering together and sort of sharing pictures as well. And yeah, so these are your cabins on board. So your cabins are very comfortable cabins. They're all private ensuite cabins, so they're very comfortable. And but the purpose of our trips is hopefully you'll only be sleeping in your cabins when you're awake. Hopefully you'll be out on excursions, up on the bridge, out in the lounges, enjoying the Arctic scenery. Both ships, they have a sauna, they have a hot tub on board as well. And then in your cabin, so of course, all of your sort of bedding, towels, that's all provided in there. There's hair dryers in each of the cabins. Both of the ships, they are European ships, so the plug sockets are European plugs, type C. And we also provide slippers as well. Now the slippers will be in the cabins waiting for you. These slippers, they're very, very good slippers. They're wool, they're very thermal, but they've got a hard rubber sole as well. So these slippers are designed so that you can wear them walking around the ship, but you could also go out on deck in these slippers as well. So they're really, really good. And then in your cabin, we work with a Swedish brand called Rhapsodine. And so all of your shampoos, conditioners, shower gels, body lotions, that is all in your bathrooms in your cabin as well. So hopefully it saves a bit of room on packing. And then communication. So we're in a very remote destination. Of course, a lot of people will need to keep in touch with sort of family, send messages, or make people jealous by sending great pictures. So Starlink is available on both the ships. Generally speaking, it's pretty reliable. There are some blackout spots where we need to turn it off. So if we do visit New Åsund, which is the research station, we have to turn it off when we go into there. But if we do turn the Wi-Fi off at any stage, we will let you know. And of course, there are, if you do need to reach home, there are protocols. Or if someone needs to get in contact with you and the Wi-Fi is down, they can get in touch with our office team and we can put them in touch with the ship directly. And then responsible and environmental travel. So we are part of AECO. So AECO is the governing body of cruise operators up in the Arctic. So we do abide by their rules. So there will be a more detailed presentation of what to do and how to act when you're out on excursions. But essentially, we follow a leave no trace system. So we want to leave these pristine conditions the way we found them, if not better. So of course, we don't want to be sort of picking any wildflowers. We don't want to be disturbing any wildlife. We don't want to be moving any sort of artifacts, even sort of stones, antlers, or any bones. We want to leave everything as is. Of course, we take safety very seriously. So before any landing, the guides will be scouting. Of course, there is the danger of polar bears out there. So when you are out on your excursions, you will be with the 2 expedition guides at all times. The expedition team, they do carry a rifle, they do carry a flare gun, touch wood, and luckily we've never had to use it in our years of operation. But that is sort of peace of mind, but we fully scout areas before we make any landings. And then, as I say, we want to leave these destinations as we found them, if not better. So Svalbard, the location, it is at the end of the Gulf Stream. So being at the end of the Gulf Stream, a lot of sort of rubbish or fishing byproduct does end up on the coast of Svalbard, unfortunately. So if we are landing and we see any rubbish, we do try and sort of pick it up and remove it. Last season, we moved an incredible amount of waste. There was a lot of fishing nets, discarded fishing equipment, which had ended up on the coast of Svalbard, and anything like that, we will try and take and remove it. So we're leaving these destinations better than we found them. And of course, respectable wildlife viewing. So as I say, we never want to sort of actively encroach or follow or approach wildlife. Of course, we understand you probably want to get as close as you can to have your best pictures or to have the best encounters, but we do respect the wildlife. Now, generally, the wildlife, then they're not too bothered by us. They don't really pay much attention to us. But if we do see any sort of anxious behaviour from any of the wildlife, we will pull out. We will pull away. And there are guidelines for us to follow, and the expedition team will make you aware of all of those guidelines. So that is a very sort of brief overview of what to expect on your voyage. And so that does bring us to our Q&A. So this is a chance, if you haven't asked any questions, you can put them in now. So yeah, I'm going to dive straight into some of these questions. So we have a question. Will this webinar be recorded and circulated later? Yes, it is being recorded. The recording will be shared and the slides will also be shared. So there was a bit of interactive. You can click on some of those links to find out more. So this will be shared with you. Usually it takes sort of 24 to 48 hours for it to download and be sent, but it will be with you. Yeah, there's another question about the recording. Does the boat provide shampoo and basic toiletries like a hotel? Yes, we do. So as I said, we work with a Swedish company, so it's all organic products in your bathrooms. And if you ever run out, you have the stewardess on board, so the stewardess or your steward can provide extras. Are there electrical sockets to prom? So yeah, it's a European plug socket, so there are two prom, and there are also on the Viking Fjord there are USB-C and USB-C sort of just you can plug the USB-Cs straight in. Does the ship move during the day or at night as well? So the answer is both, and each expedition is different. There'll be some nights where we're at anchor, the ship's not moving, but often during the night the ship will be moving. And the one thing to mention, Svalbard, every single one of our trips, it will be 24-hour daylight, so we can move. There's no problem with us moving during the night. And what we often like is for the guests to fall asleep, and then you wake up in a new fjord, in a new destination. So moving at night, it does really maximize our time. But there are some days where we'll do a morning excursion, and then once you're back on the ship having lunch, we'll reposition the ship maybe to the next fjord or maybe even further. So we could keep the itinerary as varied as possible. And there is a question of the likelihood of rough seas, which I will tie into this. So yeah, when the ship is moving, typically if there is really bad weather or if a storm is coming in, we typically like to take shelter in a fjord, so we avoid sort of being out on rough seas. Of course, there's sometimes where it might be unavoidable, but typically Svalbard, it is quite a protected area. We're never doing open sea crossings. We're sort of quite close to the coastline. The only time where we are sort of out in the open sea is if we are going up to the ice edge, up into the pack ice. So there are times where we are out at sea, but if we are doing that, we try and do it on the best day. So the expedition team, the captain, they're always monitoring the weather. So yeah, we try and avoid rough seas where possible. How do we access the Zodiacs? So the Zodiacs, so the expedition team, they will bring the Zodiacs. There's a crane takes the Zodiacs off. The expedition team will drive the Zodiacs to a gangway. So you'll need to walk down. It's about 3 steps. There's railings on each side, and there's the expedition team, and there's also on our ships, there's able-bodied seamen. So there's 2 of them. So again, if you have any sort of mobility issues, they can always help you in and out, but you do need to navigate steps to get in and out of the Zodiacs. What's a typical summer water temperature for cold plunging? So sea ice freezes at -3 degrees, but typically it's hovering around 0. So it's pretty fresh in there. There's a question, laundry facilities available. So we don't have a dedicated laundry service on board, but if you did need any sort of emergency washing, there is a washing machine on board, there is a dryer on board. So just ask your steward or stewardess, and they're more than happy usually to put sort of a wash on for you. It's not an iron service, it's not a fancy service, but if you need something washed, they're usually more than happy to do it. There's another question here, daft question. No daft questions. What happens if you need a comfort break on a hike? So yeah, that is a good question. If nature does call on a hike, we're in Arctic territory, we leave no trace, we will need to take you back to the ship. It does happen. I've been on trips before, and it doesn't mean the whole group needs to go back to the trip, but if 1 or 2 people want to go back to the ship, they can, and then we bring them back to join the rest of the group. So yeah, obviously try and before we go out on any excursion, it's best to go to the toilet beforehand. But of course, if you need to get back to the ship, we have procedures in place to get you back. If we arrive a few days early, can we still get picked up at the airport? Typically, we're pretty flexible on this. So yeah, so just as long as you fill in your flight details and we have that information, we can pick you up and take you to your hotel. Will we get close to bird breeding areas? If so, which species? So yes, so bird life is really good in Svalbard. So there's certain spots, there's certain bird cliffs where we'll absolutely see birds breeding. So little auks, so it's I call them sort of the Lunga brother or sister of the puffin. They are part of the puffin family. They will be breeding in the thousands in Svalbard. So yeah, we can see them breeding. We've also got sort of guillemots. There's also really good sort of duck life. You have the eiders, you've got the kin eiders, all which breed in Svalbard. So yeah, it's a really good birding destination. If we're lucky, the ivory gull is sort of the big ticket item. Our best chance of seeing the ivory gull is typically up in the pack ice, but typically where bears are feeding, there's also good bird life. So the gulls, a lot of gulls follow the bears as well. There's a couple more questions on rough seas and seasickness. So, and this one says, did you discuss seasickness prevention? No, I haven't mentioned that. So first thing to say, if there is going to be any rough seas, like I said, we try and avoid it, but if there is, and it's unavoidable, the crew, the captain, they will make you aware in advance. So if we're coming into rough waters, you'll have ample time to medicate properly. So there is preventative medication on board. My advice is, if you're not sure that you suffer from seasickness or you haven't been on a trip like this before, and the crew say we're going into sort of rough waters, it is to take the medication. Once you start feeling seasick, there's very little you can do to take it away, but you can prevent it by taking the medication. But yeah, if you do get seasickness, again, there's you know, the crew are very accommodating, but the best thing for seasickness is fresh air, really. So get out on deck, the cold temperatures, look at the horizon line, and hopefully you will feel better. Again, another birding question: are there puffins in the area? So yeah, puffins. They are a migratory bird to Svalbard, so they typically arrive mid-May. Depending on the year, sometimes it is earlier, and they're typically gone by mid-August. So yeah, puffins are likely. We normally see puffins out at sea. Sometimes we see them in the cliffs, but typically puffins will see them sort of feeding or fishing out at sea. Is the water temperature different from the air temperature? So typically depends on the time of year. So it's not going to be huge variance. But yeah, in the early season, as I say, it can go as low as -14, 15. The sea temperature, it's never going to be that cold. It's usually hovers around 0. And then back to comfort breaks. Do you go back on the ship for 1 and 2s? We do. So if you do need a 1 or a 2, it is we can't leave any trace. So the rules are we go back for both. But a typical excursion, we're looking at sort of 2 to 3 hours. Like, we're going to be out on a hike, it will be around 2 to 3 hours. If we're out on the Zodiacs, again, sort of 2 to 3 hours. It depends on what we see. So you're never out for sort of for hours on end. There's a question on drones. Are drones allowed? Unfortunately not, because firstly, Svalbard, the governor of Svalbard, they've banned drones from any national park in Svalbard. 95% of Svalbard is a national park. So there's a very small area on the east coast, which we typically don't visit because it's not the most interesting area, where you are allowed. But we are members of AECO, and AECO have also banned drones being flown from smaller, from any expedition or any cruise vessel. So yeah, unfortunately, no drones on the trips. Will we see pack ice waterfalls in late August? Yes, so late August is probably, later in the season, is probably one of the better time for the waterfalls. So we need a lot of snow melt for the waterfalls to happen. So yeah, August is a very good time. There's a few ice caps that we can visit where we know there's good waterfalls. So yes, August is a good time. And yeah, so going back to the toilet issues. So for number ones, you can, if you have a way not to sort of do it discreetly into sort of a bottle or into sort of a bladder, and then empty it when you're back on the ship, you're absolutely fine. That is fine. As long as you carry it back to the ship, that is absolutely fine. And then, how bright is the midnight daylight in early May? So yeah, so throughout the season, as I say, we've got 24-hour daylight. In the summer months, so once we head into June, July, August, the sun's pretty much right at 12 o'clock for the majority of the day. In April, in May, that sun is lower in the sky, so there's hours where that sun is lower and we get really good light. So that's why in May we typically try and do more photography voyages so we can make the most of that good light. And then that light returns in August. Once we head into sort of mid-August, that sun starts to go lower in the sky as well. So yeah, you have got 24-hour daylight. It can affect the body clock. You can feel oh, it's not bedtime, or it's like, I often find that I don't get much sleep on these trips purely because I don't want to miss anything. And wildlife and landscape, it's always beautiful. So and the 24-hour daylight, you do forget the time, you do lose track of time. So yeah, but yeah, I think that is every question that we have. So as I do say, if you do have any further questions, do reach out to us. We're more than happy to answer. There's no silly questions. So get in touch with Let's Go at secretatlas.com. Give our office number a call. We've got staff, myself and my colleague Karis. We're based in the UK. We look after the majority of our European, Asian, Australasian clients. And then we have, I've got my colleagues Anna, and we've also got Cindy. Anna's based in Connecticut. Cindy, she's based in Chile. And we're all happy to answer any questions you have, give you any tips, give you some pointers. So yeah, any questions, do get in touch with us. And we will, we're more than happy to answer. I see a couple more questions come in. Will a recording of the webinar be sent? Yes, we will have a recording of the webinar. And yeah, so any questions, get in touch. For 2026, all of our trips, the expedition teams are confirmed. That's the photographers, that's the expedition leaders, that's expedition guides. If you want to know who you've got, get in touch with us. We'll let you know. We've got bios of all of the team. So yeah, but yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing you up in Svalbard this summer. So yeah, if we don't speak to you beforehand, have a fantastic, safe journey up to Svalbard. And yeah, we can't wait to have you on board the ship. But thank you so much, everyone.